what exactly will you learn in this course? First, you'll learn the basic concepts of Redux. Redux is actually a very small library that allows you to follow a certain pattern when it comes to state management. So you'll need to understand this pattern really well before you can use Redux correctly. You'll learn the core concepts without Angular. You're just going to use Redux to manage a simple console app state. Then you're going to take an existing Angular 2 app, a pretty simple one, and move its state over to Redux. So this is where you'll see how to make Redux play with Angular. In the end of this course, you're going to be introduced to some more advanced concepts. You'll learn how to make your state immutable and how to test the various bits that you code up for state management with Redux. This is the app that you'll work on later in this course. You'll take this existing Angular app and move all of its state management over to Redux. So how does this Redux thing work? Well, it's built on 3 core principles that you need to understand. So let's start there. Redux is a single source of truth in your app. You should be able to look at the Redux state, and that should tell you exactly why your views are in the state that they're in. No more states spread all over the show with you playing detective to track down data. It's all in one big store, and you can easily take a peek at it. State is read-only. In other words, it's immutable. This means that when you want to update the state in your app, you'll actually make a copy of the state and change just the bits that should be updated. This comes with various benefits, which you'll learn about during this course. Changes to state are made through pure functions. Basically, a pure function doesn't have any side effects and can be called a gazillion times with the same input and should always return the same output. It makes the code easy to test and easy to reason about. If this sounds crazy to you, no sweat. You'll understand it after this course. You might have heard that Redux provides unidirectional data flow to your app. Have a look at this diagram. Basically, your view component dispatches an action, which is very much like an event. This action then gets passed through your reducer function, where you get to tell Redux what changes should be made to state based on the action. Or more accurately, it allows you to calculate the new state based on the action. Redux then applies the changes to state and lets all the components know that the data has been updated and that there is new state available. That is the core concept of Redux. Before we get into the code, we need to talk about environments very quickly. You're going to use Node during this course. If you're already an Angular developer, you will have it installed already. Well, I sure hope so. Also, I would strongly advise you to use Visual Studio Code as your editor. I love Visual Studio Code. Try to use it too, even if you have another favorite editor. It'll make it easier for you to follow along. I prefer using Yarn for package management, but you can follow along without it. It's just an alternative to NPM. Also, you'll need to use Git to follow along. Again, I'm sure you already have it installed. If not, I strongly recommend that you get it installed before following along. Lastly, I built this course on OS X, but you can do everything in the course on Windows. You're going to set up some starter code now. You'll learn how it works and you'll see that it's got a bit of a problem, which we'll fix during the rest of this module. Before you get started, please use git to clone this repo from GitHub. So on your command line, run git clone and this repo address. Once you've cloned it, cd into the folder and run npm install, or if you're using Yarn like I am, run yarn. This will use the package.json file to install Redux. Okay, now fire up your editor. I'm hoping that you are using Visual Studio Code. This is the first code that you're going to use Redux on. As promised, it doesn't even use any Vue library, but it does log out to the console, which is what views looked like before we had browsers and stuff like Windows. I might be giving away my age here. Also, you'll be using only JavaScript here instead of TypeScript, just to keep the dependencies low for now. You'll definitely use TypeScript later on in this course when we work with Angular. So basically, we have our state here, which contains a bunch of courses. Each course has a topic. This is actually very much what state looks like in Redux, and we're going to work on state very similar to this later with Angular. Look at this addView function. All it does is takes a function that's passed to it and call it with the state. So see this as our poor man's view engine. And below that, we use this view engine to spit out 2 views. The first one just logs out the number of courses on state. Note that this function gets its state through as a parameter. because the addView function passes the state to it when it executes it. We don't want to refer to global variables. And below that, we've got another view. This one just shows the latest course on state, which we get by pulling the last one from the array. So this is simple enough, right? But what about if we want to change the state? We would actually like our views to log out its updated representation of state. Let's try that out very naively now. Go and add the following code. Push a new object to the courses array on the default state variable. And this object should have a name, which we just name anything, and a topic, which also doesn't really matter. Okay, now in the terminal in Visual Studio Code, when you execute this file, you should see that it didn't make any visible change to our views, meaning our views did not re-render when the state was changed. Let's go and fix that. Now you're going to introduce Redux and start defining your store. We're not going to make any state changes yet though. We're first going to wire up the store without any state mutation through Redux. Now you can pull it into your code. At the top, require Redux. For now, we're only interested in pulling in the create store function. Redux was installed when you initially cloned the repo and ran npm install. Now scroll down to below your state definition. Here, you want to create a variable called store and assign it to the result of calling the create store function that you just imported. But hang on, what do you need to pass in here? Well, create store needs access to the reducer function so that it can run all actions that get dispatched through to the reducer function to get the updated state. As you can see in this diagram, when an action gets dispatched, Redux will ensure that the action is fed into your reducer with the existing state so that the updated state can be calculated from that and returned. For now, just define the structure of your reducer function. So above where you define the store, create a function called reducer and give it two parameters. The first is the state, the second, the action. And from this function, we just return the state. Don't worry too much about this for now. You're going to focus on building out the reducer pretty soon. You're just doing this part so that you can construct your store. So now you have a reducer function, pass it into the create store function as its first parameter. And the second parameter to create store is the initial state. And guess what? You already have some initial state. Pass the default state variable into this as the second parameter. That is how you define a store in Redux. Pretty simple, right? You just pull in the create store function using require or ES6 module syntax, then call it and pass in a reducer function followed by the initial state for the store. Pretty simple. But when we actually run this, you should see that it didn't have any effect on our views at all. The changes get made to the initial state, but the views don't re-render. No surprises there though. Have a look at the diagram again. You still need to trigger this change by dispatching an action so that Redux knows about the action and the reducer needs to be fleshed out so that it can calculate the new state based on the action that was fired. So, how can you let your view code know about the changes to state so that it can re-render? And by re-render in this context, I just mean that it writes an updated message to the console. You need to subscribe to the Redux store so that it calls your view code every time to notify it that the state has been updated. Have a look at the diagram again. This is the part that we'll do next. We'll wire up the subscription from the view logic to the store so that it gets notified of any changes. Find your addView function. Luckily, all your views use this function, so it's a logical place to go and subscribe to state changes. Below where you call viewfunc, add the following code. Call the subscribe function on the store. This function expects a function to be passed to it. It'll call this function every time the state gets updated. Just pass it an arrow function, and inside this arrow function, what do you think we need to do here? Just call the viewfunc again, and get the latest state from the store. Do you think that'll work now? Run it and see. Nope, it doesn't work. It's because we're still not dispatching any actions to the store, so it doesn't know that state has been updated. Let's dispatch an action quickly. Just before or after we have your code that changes the state directly, add the following code. Call dispatch on the store. This is how you dispatch an action. And to that pass an object. Remember, I told you earlier that actions are just plain old JS objects. Each action should have a type. For this one, just give it a string value of add course. Later on in this course, you'll spend more time to do this correctly, but this is fine for now. And you want to pass some data onto this action. So add a course attribute and assign that to the course that you can pattern paste from the old code that used to update the state directly, and remove the old code that's still hanging around. Okay, so run that. Cool, you can see that it re-renders the views when the action gets dispatched because it's double logging the messages out. But the views don't show us the updated state. Have a look at the diagram. Your state is not updating because your reducer is responsible for making the changes, and at the moment, the reducer doesn't make any changes to state. Now you're going to adapt your reducer so that it updates the state when the action gets dispatched. Find your reducer function and in here add a switch statement. I know, a switch statement. There are other more elegant ways to target actions, but let's stick to a switch statement. Let's keep it simple. Switch on the action's type, and if the action of the type add course was dispatched, you want to change your state to reflect the new course. You might be tempted now to just add the course to the array that you have on state, but let's have a look at the 3 principles of Redux. See, number 2 states that state is read-only, and number 3 states that changes made to state is done through pure functions. So we would violate both these principles if we change state directly. Now you'll learn how to mutate state in a non-side effect way. Use object assign and pass a new object to it. Then copy all of your current state over to this new object. This keeps the old state intact, and then you say that you also want the following to be on your new state object, a new courses array, and you say that this array should have all the items from the previous state's courses array, plus the new course from the action. See, this way you don't make any changes to the previous state. You're creating a new state object and changing only the bits that need to change. This is also good for memory, because even if your courses array contained thousands of records, all the references will stay intact. The new array just contains pointers to the same references with one new reference on the end. This is what we mean when we say Redux state is read-only, and that changes are made through pure functions. Okay, now add a default switch value and just return state. When your reducer doesn't know what to do, it should just return the state that it was passed. Okie dokie, now run that. Great, you should see that your views update and show updated state. As a bonus, I want to show you something cool quickly. Go to where you pulled in the create store function. Pull in an additional function called apply middleware from Redux. I'm going to show you how to add middleware that logs out a message every time an action is fired so that you can see what effect it had on state. So define a logger function and make it take a parameter called store. This function should return another function that has a parameter called next. And this one should return yet another function that has an action parameter. It looks crazy, I know. It's probably so that Redux can do some cool functional magic on this structure. Okay, so in here, log out the following message, dispatching, and then the action. Get the result of the action by calling next, and log out the updated state by adding a label like this, and getting the latest state from the store, and then you can return the result for the next part in the chain. Look, the detail of what you're doing here is not important. It's only important that you see the results and understand how cool Redux is, how nice it is to see all your changes to state happening in this way. When you create a store, also passing the results of calling the apply middleware function and passing it your newly minted logger function, and then run your code again. See, that's pretty cool. So in your application, where you might have hundreds or maybe thousands of actions, you can track what each action meant to the state. That's pretty powerful. That will help you during development and during troubleshooting when you've got apps in production. You can even roll back actions very cheaply because state is read-only and all the previous copies of state is still hanging around. That would be great for an undo function. So, what did you learn in this module? My hope is that you have a better understanding of this diagram. With Redux, you get a predictable way that state changes occur, and that way is easy to reason about, to work with, and to debug. All views that want to make changes to state dispatches actions. The action gets fed through the reducer, along with the state at the time that the action was dispatched. The reducer then calculates a new state reusing references from the previous state object in a clever way to ensure that memory doesn't become a problem. And then the store notifies your views that there is new state available, and the views re-render based on the new state. This is what we refer to as unidirectional data flow. You also learned that Redux has 3 core principles. The Redux state makes up the single source of truth in your app. It's just one state tree, regardless of the size of your app. State is read-only. You should never override state directly. Updated state gets calculated by peer reducer functions. That's it. Hopefully it makes a bit more sense now. Listen, one last thing. I know you might be scratching your head a bit now, but don't worry. In the next module, we're going to start using Redux with Angular. That should make it a bit more familiar to you. And we're going to take an existing Angular app, the one you see on the screen now, and adapt it to rely on Redux for state management. Let's get cracking.